And I think the fear of starting and of waiting until something feels really refined and perfect holds a lot of people back from adding any value or conversation to the space at all. And the one way to ensure that you never beat obscurity is to never try.
Is this thing on?
I
All
think
right,
so.
here we go. We got another episode of John and Ed's TED Talk together.
Together
Oh,
Tuesday.
I can't believe I messed
I
that up.
got you.
We've got another episode of John and Ed's Tech
Tech
Talk Together Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And we're joined by our very own Savannah Russell. Savannah,
Very
thanks for
happy
being
to
here.
be here. Thank you, thank you. Very surreal after being editing behind the scenes all this time.
Yeah, so what do you do here?
That's such a good question. And I think the question that people usually have for marketers because it feels really ambiguous. But for BuildSTR specifically, I primarily run our social media, which is currently just our LinkedIn. Ever since you guys have started filming T4, I also edit and do all of the behind scenes stuff with the videos. I do a lot of our strategic visual stuff. So anytime we are visually present, whether it be at an event or a speaking engagement, any of the, branding or merch that needs design that's going to be representing our brand. I do all of the design behind that. I make sure our blog stays up and running. So if you guys haven't checked that out, that's on our BuildSTR website. And yeah, it's kind of, I view a successful marketing role as one that does not just stay in, the traditional marketing lane. I kind of, my personal approach for marketing is that I think it functions best when it's really cross-functional. So there are my typical marketing duties, but I do some stuff outside of that as well. So whatever I can do to support other teams, it's all part of the description.
So I'm curious, how did you get into marketing? Were you like doom scrolling one day and you were like, that's what I want to do?
I want to be the person setting the trap, not the one falling into it.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's a good question too. So for undergrad, I studied communications, which my husband likes to tease me that, why did you study communications? You already speak very well. He actually asked that unironically, during one of our first dates. Oh gosh. But I took communications because at the time I wasn't actually sure what I wanted to do with my degree. So I wanted to study something that would be really general, that would keep options open. I knew I loved working with people and I knew I loved being creative. And at the time, communication seemed like a really good fusion of those. A lot of people with communication degrees, they end up going into journalism, radio, newscasting, that type of thing. So I tried to set myself up well by staying general, and around junior year of college, sophomore, junior year, maybe the summer in between that, I ended up finding out about this internship at a local cybersecurity company. And I'd grown up with my dad working in cybersecurity, so that was a little bit on my radar already. And I thought I'd try it out, and it ended up turning into a 2-year long internship. And I didn't know that I was looking for a marketing role at the time, but there were all these like listings, job listings, internship listings that were posted in the comm department, and that was one of them. So I thought marketing could be a really good blend of everything I love to do. So let's give it a shot. And it's kind of stuck. So that was my start. And I think I stuck with it because, I mean, it really is just that. It's such a cool segue between getting to work with people, getting to be very relational and having these conversations, and also that creative side. And I love it because having conversations with you guys, people internal to the team, is just as important, if not maybe more important, than also maintaining dialogue with people external to BuildSTR. So you want to know your audience, you want to listen to your audience, but what you're telling your audience and talking with them about is, whatever is a representation of who your team is. And to know your team, You got to talk with your team. You got to be social. So I really love, how you get to be a little bit all over the place. Definitely helps my ADHD a little bit, that every day is a little bit different. And it always feels kind of new. So you guys probably relate to that a little bit with your job functions being
You're
in
saying where you've got
sales
brain
and
disorders.
Squirrel.
yeah,
What?
exactly. So
Well, look, I love that you said that. I don't think I've ever heard a marketing person say that, but it's like I was on, like I had just joined this company for a sales team, and I was talking to my manager at the time, and it was a mid-sized shop, and I was like, oh, we're talking, I'm putting this pitch together. What if we said this? And he was like, that's a great story, but it's not true for this company. And I
mhm.
think if you not, and I wasn't in marketing, it was a sales pitch, but um, if you don't, if you know, like, oh, we can do this thing, but you don't know about the team, then you won't be able to tell the right story. It might be a good sounding story, but it could be the wrong one. So I love that you said that. That's really great. It's very
A
insightful
hun-
of you to catch that.
Well, I appreciate that you found that insightful. I think it's so important because there's so much, I mean, social media has introduced to the business world so much noise. I mean, there's noise anyways, right? In our own personal socials, if you guys keep up with that. But there are so many company voices that are trying to compete to be the loudest instead of the most meaningful. And I think you get to be the most meaningful by just being really authentic. And it's not about being the most authentic to anybody else, it's being the most authentic to who we are. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things I really love about BuildsTR is that I sound like I'm trying to pitch BuildsTR. You guys already work here. But I think that genuinely is one of the things I love about BuildsTR is that there's not like I don't have to fabricate, or kind of manipulate the story at all for it to
Right.
be
Right.
compelling. I think I love that each person on the team has been in the seat of the client. And that's really compelling. That's a really authentic side of our story. And I don't need to put a marketing spin on it or anything. I've definitely worked at companies before where I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to really, PR spin this up for this to have a little razzle dazzle. But yeah, I think just finding the source of your authenticity is really, really important. And it usually starts with the people. So
Great question that brought us there, Johnny D.
Allegedly. That's what I do. I just
sure.
ask questions and get the conversation started.
It was a good one. It was a good one.
I also like the Razzle Dazzle because that's my dog's name, and so
That's perfect. How did she get the name Razzle Dazzle? Did she just have that signing of a personality? What's her
so fun
story?
fact, I adopted her with that name. Well, I adopted her with the name Razzle, and naturally the Dazzle comes after that. And
Of
then
course.
about a year ago, my mom sent me a picture because she was my mom's old dog, and she sent me a picture of an album. And apparently there is a band called Razzle, and she was like, "Look, this is how I got Razzle's name." I was like, "That's a band?"
Okay. We gotta check this out.
So she sent me the album art, which is super. I think it's 80s, uh, like an 80s super 80s rock with the yellow and orange and the crazy hair and everything. And I was like, I had no idea. I just liked Razzle
Air
Dazzle.
metal. There we go.
Yeah, I love that there was more backstory than you even realized. You just thought it was kind of fitting for her personality, but there was lore to it.
There's lore. Taylor has no backstory. I adopted him with that name from the shelter. He had it for 4 years. I didn't have the heart to change it, so he just gets Taylor.
So you stuck with the intake name. That's interesting. A lot of times people revolt, but he was at the shelter for 4 years.
That's why I felt like I couldn't change it.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
he'd been called that for 4 years. So I'm like, can't just. But he responds to anything. Literally, like you breathe, he's like, "What's up, dude?" so,
Now, is he the 14-year-old dog or he's the 7-year-old?
he's the 14. Yeah.
Oh, oh my gosh. Yeah, at that age, they're just like, call me whatever. I'm not even partial. Oh,
Yeah. If he can hear you now, the poor thing.
yeah. Ed, do you have any dogs? I don't know that
I
I've ever
do.
asked
I
you.
have we think he's 14 years old, 13, 14, something like that. He was a rescue. We were living in a little apartment, and Jess had wanted a dog for a long time, and so I went and talked to the landlords. I was like,
Hmm.
"Hey, we're good, blah blah blah. Can we have a dog?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Um, so we spent a lot of time looking at, like, we drove all over LA. There's so many dog shelters around LA, and no joke, we went to some that were like they looked like a Soviet era prison. We're like, this is really sad. And then we went
Oh my gosh.
to the Santa Monica dog shelter, and I was like, this is nicer than any home I've ever lived in. Um, and yeah, it ended up finding like this adoption agency, and there was a American bulldog that we really wanted, Wanda. And I was like, that's our dog.
Wanda.
And she was just so sweet and so cute. And the family that like was meeting her before us, they ended up adopting her. And I was like, I
Mm.
had uncouth things to think towards them. And then, like, no joke, like a month later or something like that, we found Cole, this really cute looking fuzzy, we thought maybe poodle mix with like a little white spot on his chest.
Mhm.
So we just went and got there first. When I came in, he like ran and hid behind the adoption lady's leg. And I just sat on the ground and just ignored him. And he would like come out and then go back, come out, go back, come on. And within like 15 minutes, he was like put his paw on my chest and was like smelling around my
Oh.
face. And I was like, and I
That,
just was
that
ignoring him. I was like, yeah.
that's the one.
So we renamed him to Johnsy from Cole. And he is now winding down. So he like lost his hearing. Um, he goes through days where he's like incredible hip pain and give him some meds, and then other days he's like running around, like jumps up on the couch, and I'm like, "Were you just messing with me? Were you just trying to like fuck with me so you get more treats?" Like, it worked, but um,
It's the duality of dog.
yeah,
That's funny.
yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
And you
okay,
said that oh, I'm sorry.
no, go
But
ahead. What was your
you
question?
said that you foster dogs, right?
For me,
Yes.
yeah, I have in the past. We don't currently have a foster dog, but our dog, Ozzy, named after Ozzy Albies from the Braves, we got him 2 months after we got married and just really love the shelter we work with. They actively work to take in other dogs from prison filling shelters from around the area. And they just do a lot of great work in the community. So I told my husband if we ever had the opportunity to foster, I'd want to. So we've fostered two dogs now. Um, and both have been kind of unique experiences, but I think we're going to take a break for a while because it's a great thing to do if you have time. No sacrifice is ever convenient, but it's a particularly busy time right now. So we would definitely do it again in the future. Right now, we're labeled as a vacation foster. So I don't know if you guys are ever interested in fostering. It's a much shorter term commitment. You can do it over a weekend, and you're really just fostering for when the animal's primary foster goes out of town. So it's still a low maintenance way to be involved.
I was about to question, like, what is a vacation foster?
Yeah,
I was like, if they're
yeah. It's
foster,
like
that
yeah.
makes more sense now that you've
I think
explained it.
that's the hardest part of fostering is just kind of the uncertain amount of time that you have them. If you have a puppy, those go really fast. So that could be you have them for a week. But our first foster, we had her for almost 3 months, which doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're trying not to bond with a dog because you know you can't keep them, it's a really long
It's
time.
hard.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, and then our second dog, he just the elevator didn't go all the way up on that one, but we love him. And we had him for I want to say 5 weeks. So vacation fostering is a little easier because there's still a need for that, but it's a predefined, set a time. So it's 5 days or a weekend. So it's a little more manageable than, putting your heart out on the line for until they get adopted.
Indefinite.
So yeah, indefinite.
So that's kind of what it's like when you step into a new role. You're like fostering the marketing for this, for whatever company. You're like, maybe the elevator just doesn't go up all the way for this company and I got to find my way out. Or you go, God, I really love working here. We get to do fun podcasts where we just bullshit and talk about dogs and then talk about business and then talk about other cool stuff. So
What a segue.
I'm going to start just like a series, an endless number of podcasts. One is going to be like unsolicited advice. Next one's going to be like, what a segue. Michael Scott Paper Company. That's another one. So
I think that would be a really funny, just like prank to play on people in your day-to-day life, is to make to be like, hey, that's actually a great transition to what we're talking about. And just say something totally unrelated and leaving them just hanging. Like,
yeah. And then they're like, why? How is that a transition? I missed it. So
yeah.
In the context of what we're doing, what, I guess, a cheesy transition, what do you hope to accomplish in the next 6 months?
That's an interesting question. I think for 6 months, Ed, you and I have talked a particular lot about this, but I think for a newer company, at least in terms of marketing, probably sales too, but I think one of the really challenging things is just nobody knows who you are, right? That comes with, just being a new company, comes with the territory. And I think the big goal is to to tell people who you are and then to tell them why they should care. Because if they hear your name, but it carries no value along with it, if they see your logo on a hoodie while walking through a conference, or, they see a video of ours through a sponsored ad, whatever it might be, that's all well and good to get the visibility. But if there's no connection as to why that exposure should be meaningful to them, it's kind of a waste of everybody's time. So for the next 6 months, I think my goal is really to fight that obscurity. I would love by the end of the year to eliminate it for people to know who we are and why it should matter to them. And I think there's a lot of avenues to do that with where we're currently at. A big one is just utilizing social media to its fullest capabilities. There's so much to offer there. And just trying to understand the ever-changing LinkedIn algorithm. Working with you guys have done a tremendous job of creating this content on a regular basis, and that's great. Because I think just starting the conversation and providing some thought leadership, I think that's a great way to do that. So I could give a laundry list of examples, but that might be me geeking out a little bit more than it would be of interest. So happy to talk about whatever part of that sounds intriguing, if any.
So in your
But
time that you've been here, what's been your most exciting or most accomplished thing that you feel like that you've done? Because I feel like it's been a lot of stuff, right?
I certainly feel that way. Because I've been here, gosh, when did I start? Um I want to say I started late July, so I'm getting close to a year. Um, I've not really thought about that. I think it might feel like a not as in a razzle dazzle type of point if you're outside of marketing. But I think when I came on board, my first interview was with Sean Bratcher and Kyle Hines, who are two of our co-founders. And I think they just really didn't know where to start. There was a lot of question marks floating around. Hey, we think we need marketing, but we're not really sure what that looks like. And really, when I came on board, the ask was really just, can we just have someone to be a dedicated, somebody to oversee our social media? And I think for me, it's multifaceted, but it's been exciting to see our LinkedIn presence grow. But even more than that, I think having really consistent content going out every week, and going from early on to where it was kind of like pulling teeth to find something to post about, just because we hadn't flexed that muscle yet. It's not that we weren't doing anything interesting, but it was, we didn't even know what our brand voice was. We didn't really know what we sounded like, because it's, it's a whole team of people. What does a whole team of people sound like as one brand voice? And so I think figuring that out, identifying more of our brand voice, and then having just a lot of content. Like now I'm kind of at a point where it's less of, oh gosh, what are we going to post this week? And more of, I might have to push that back to next week. I don't think we have space for it right now. So I would
Yeah.
say going from not having any content engines to having, generating more buy-in, and we have a lot to talk about. And I think that's going to be a huge proponent in that, that push towards eliminating that obscurity we just talked about a couple minutes ago. So what do you guys feel about that? Have y'all, I'm curious to know kind of generally what your feeling is around, kind of social media for companies. Have you guys had positive interactions, negative, and, how do you guys feel about what a company social media should do? And then maybe connect that to what we're doing at BuildsTR.
So funny story. I don't have social media.
You don't even use LinkedIn?
You have
The
a
only
LinkedIn.
the only social media I have is LinkedIn
Okay.
Okay.
because I need it. Because coming from a consulting background and everything like that, I needed to be able to share with clients, and now it's very beneficial and different things like that. But now, helping all these different clients and everything, like I get all the advertisements for all the clients that I look up and all the customers, and it's really cool seeing how all the different companies try following trends, and that's how I figure out what's happening in the other social media outlets, is because they try replicating what's happening in other outlets on LinkedIn now too. So I'm still 10 years behind all the current trends, but that's how I get my social media time now.
So funny. I'm also disconnected from social trends. Jess was watching some Netflix documentary about some like thing that happened in social media, and this family got split apart, and there's some kind of cult church thing. But I was just like, whoa, wait. This happened so long ago that years have gone by where this family hasn't even been connected to this person from their family, where they blew up on social media years before that. And I was like, this is how little I'm connected with the trends. But to answer your question, something that's interesting is, I think in general, in this kind of tech space, that there's a lot of scrambling to figure out, like, hey, wait, how do we use this to apply it to what we're doing to let people know about us in a cool way? And then we're like, we're gonna have a podcast, like and then you see
Yeah.
like, like, oh, it's kind of easy to crack on boomers, but you'll see people from different generations, and they'll be like, okay, cool, we need to have our professional microphone, and like I've got my suit and tie on, and I am gonna be a reporter. And it's like,
Right.
well, I don't care. I just want to, if I'm engaging with something, I just want to feel like this is something that a friend of mine did, or um but that said, there's like a real art to it. And the first time I noticed that is at a previous company. I was helping with this rebrand. We found an intern, and she was kind of like, I get what you guys are doing, and I like the logo and the color palette that you guys chose, but you have no idea. She didn't say this, but she was like, she would show us. I'd be like, hey, here's a one pager, and she'd go, oh, okay, and she'd be like, I worked on this last night, and it was like, it was so simple, but it made what I did look like a kid in like sixth grade had done it 10 years ago. Like, um, no aspersions to kids in sixth grade 10 years ago, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's definitely a
Yeah.
superpower And this kind of segues. Actually, you and I were just talking about this earlier. A previous colleague was like, "Hey, what are you doing for marketing these days?" And I was like, "Oh, well, we got somebody and she's amazing." And that superpower is something, being able to help translate, like we were talking about earlier. You get to know the team, you get to know the technology, which is why we've brought you on different sales calls or other things that really make sense. So I think
Yeah.
for me, the trend of what I'm seeing in the market, what I'm seeing resonate, and I guess I feel like I'm hogging the mic now, so that's where my some of my hesitation goes. But like, we'll see stuff on LinkedIn where it's like, and I'm here in New York on Veterans Day doing this awesome thing with AWS, and you're like, really? Like, what about the fact that you should, like, it's Veterans Day and there's all of these veterans that are,
Yeah.
that you should be honoring, and not trying to like make some cheesy, like, yeah, go ahead, make cheesy posts and do stuff, but don't try and tie yourself to this noble thing.
So
Like, there's a real differentiator from being able to like have a good post, differentiate yourself, but then also know when to just like shut up or not say something, or
sure.
um
Well, you start
yeah,
to get into the territory of virtue signaling, right? Which nobody wants
right,
to see.
right,
Um, and I think that really goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, it's a really general word that covers a lot, but that's where the authenticity comes in. If you're, I mean, even if you're posting what sounds interesting to you, I think one of you guys gave an example of that earlier, like, hey, this is great, but like, why is this? How is this a good reflection of the company? Um, I mean, you got to ask yourself those questions. I think at a while back, you and Kyle and I even talked about that of, hey, let's make sure that whatever decisions we're making, um, we do them confidently, but also before we move forward, let's make sure that we've asked the question of why. Even if we think we're all in agreement of why we're doing this, let's make sure we ask ourselves that because it keeps you humble, keeps you accountable.
yeah,
And I think you mentioned story earlier. Like it's really important to tell your story, but a story is, there's lots of different components. I mean, even the example you just gave with the, previous marketing person you worked with, I mean, she might have the superpower of finessing something visually, but you guys have the superpower of providing that information to be finessed. That is not my strong suit. I love writing, but when it comes to technical writing, you guys can have at it. So it really does take a village. Um, and I think whenever you get into a silo of your own opinion, whatever sounds interesting to you, you're at risk of, I mean, you're not relevant. And
yeah,
that sounds harsh, but it's the reality of, social media today because people are scrolling and the attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So if you're just kind of talking into the void, hoping that it resonates with somebody, it's not going to resonate very far. It might echo to, your best friend and your mom who created a LinkedIn account so she can stay up to date on what her number one, baby boy is doing. But it doesn't, yeah, it's got to be, hey, I have this to talk about, but why am I talking about it? Why is it
yeah,
meaningful? And how does it resonate with those who listen? Because nobody wants to be talked at, which is ironic because now I'm hogging the mic and talking at you guys. But nobody wants to be talked at. And I think that's something so many people lose is people get really self-important with their brands. And while we're all passionate about BuildStir, we see the value of it. Why should other people care? I think if you're posting about your logo and about, you know, these exciting things that you've done that generate excitement within the team, that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's got to be a universal language. That's got to be shared. So this like self-important kind of like inflated idea, it doesn't work. Maybe it did at first when, LinkedIn was first a thing, but there's too many voices doing that and it doesn't stand out. It's not original. It's not personable.
yeah.
So
It's like that. Look, there's 16 leadership principles with Amazon and AWS.
mhm,
And in our space, you'll hear people that they're kind of like the proverbial, like, smoke blowing fanboys that are just kind of like, oh yeah, LPs, this is so great, and like LP 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, you know. But for me, what you just said is summarized by being customer obsessed. And if you look at everything in the world, everything that you do, every person you interact with as your customer, then it makes sense. Then you can have that framework of like, oh, I'm going to add value. Um, I'm going to add value to my customer. But if you are customer obsessed from the perspective of I'm going to get value from my customer, that's where the I Me My show comes in, and it's no longer a two-way, you know, communication where you're like bouncing off of and going back and forth like you're improving with your customers. It's
Yeah.
just I'm amazing and come worship at my altar.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And I think, yeah, I think people pick up on that. Like, I mean, you guys even think about when you're scrolling through your LinkedIn algorithm or your LinkedIn feed, what types of content are you most likely to stop and read? Is it the one that feels really over orchestrated? You even said earlier, Ed, these people get on with these big mics and they've got the best setup and the best branding. And it's like, you're probably going to scroll right past that because it doesn't feel like you're kind of sitting in the
It's
room
forced.
with them. Yeah, it is really forced. So I think everybody's had that experience at this point. I mean, yeah, there's too many examples to count, but it does have to be that mutual relationship for sure. It can't just be about what you're giving them, but we get stuff back from our customers, not just obviously the traditional customer relationship, but we get feedback, we learn. I mean, you guys, it sounds like whenever you guys go to events, it sounds like you guys are meeting up with customers who really become friends sometimes.
It can happen,
That's
yeah.
what it
It
feels
can
like I'm
happen.
hearing. So I think that would be best case scenario, right? But
I think even besides meeting people in in person, which is awesome, but like even when we go on client calls and we like meet with our customers and different things like that, it's crazy having that personable connection and just like that really friend that friend connection. It just is kind of cool. Like it's friendly, it's professional, and just like that scrappy, dependable partner like we preach, which is kind of we know we're gonna roll our sleeves up and get stuff done, but we're gonna have a good time doing it too, which is our true authentic self.
yeah, I love that. Kyle even said recently, and I've like this is really stuck with my brain, but we take our work seriously, but not ourselves. I that yeah has given me a lot of good food for thought. But I feel like it goes exactly in line with what you're saying.
I am a
So
middle manager. I can do 20 push-ups. I am important.
assistant to the regional manager.
But it's
Oh
like that old Will Ferrell, Christina Applegate SNL skit where he's like the dad comes home and they're like eating dinner and he's like, I drive a Dodge Sebring. You know, like if you take
yeah,
yourself seriously, I think there's a difference between like taking yourself seriously because like there was a professor that I was listening to and he was like somebody was like, why do you always wear a suit? And he was like, because I respect my students. Like I take this seriously and I show up prepared for them, both in how I look, but then also in what I'm, you know. And I think that there's a difference between somebody who's performing and they're like, I did everything that I checked all the boxes and I've got my Shure microphone with an XLR cable that goes to the right, audio
yeah,
video card and I've got a mixer that versus somebody who's like, no, 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 I really care about the audio quality. That's why I have a nice microphone. I don't care what
yeah,
the brand is. I just want to make sure that when people listen, there's no problems. And I actually care about what how people feel when they're engaged, and so that's why I wear clothes that I feel like are professional and nice, and because I want to communicate to them that I invested in clothes, that like that. It's the same act kind of actions with a different intent, and that's
yeah.
important. That intent is really important.
Oh, for sure. The only caveat I would add to that, I love that line of thinking. At a previous, in a previous marketing role that I had, a really, one of the stories that stuck with me was I sat down with our CEO and was just kind of uh, having a conversation with him one day about what he felt our differentiators were, and feedback he was hearing from customers that he felt was meaningful. And one of the stories he told was that he and one of the other guys on the team went out to do a site visit with a prospective customer, and they wore jeans and t-shirts and were dressed really, really casually. And they thought on their way there, they were like, this is a little risky because, maybe they would see this as a sign of, disrespect, but we really have to show up very true to ourselves. And this is who we are. They're just a really casual bunch of guys who loved doing back end engineering. And they show up, and the customer's reaction was they agreed to sign an exclusive deal with the company that day. They said, hey, every other company that's come in here before you to pitch the exact same service, they've all shown up in, like suits, really, corporate formal. And they were a manufacturing customer. They were guys who were, wearing steel toe boots and yellow construction vests, yellow safety vests. And I think the important thing is, those guys didn't show up to that business meeting, you know, manipulatively. Like that was how they
Yeah.
did work at
Right.
the office. And it was kind of we're gonna come as we are. If that's a good fit for you, um, great. And if it's not, you know, we hope you find the right fit, which I think
Right.
embodies a lot of how BuildSTR thinks too. It's like, I
Yes.
think, John, you talk about this a lot about loving that we we know who we can help, and we know who we can best work with, and who we can do the best work for, and we're going to be honest about that. But anyway, I just thought that story stood out a lot to me because it was this example of, instead of presenting yourself how you would assume would resonate as impressive, just literally show up as yourself. And in that case, that's what won the business. And I feel like I hear an echo of really similar stories here, is that we just show up as ourselves, and that's what works. And it's less black and white than wearing jeans and a t-shirt, but sometimes it's just not using this like big corporate lingo or working so hard to try and sound impressive, like the SNL skit, bragging about whatever car you showed up in. It's just, hey, like, we get it. You know, we're over the surface level stuff too. Let's cut to the chase. Let's see if we could be a value add as a partner.
Right.
So I love
Right.
that.
Be different if you're like, I drive a Bugatti Veyron, but
Yeah.
okay, we're almost ready to wrap up. Maybe we've even gone over the time that you had blocked for this, so thank you.
Of course.
If you're going to leave authentic advice for anyone who's made it this far, with the perspective of going like, we actually have we have an abundance mindset. I used to have a very I've said this a lot recently, so I'm sorry for anyone who's heard me say it, but I used to have this like poverty mindset that I thought came from confidence, where I was like, I could do it all. But it really was like I was afraid to miss out on something. I was afraid that I wouldn't get enough, or that if I chose this one thing, I wouldn't get that thing. And even if we're giving advice to colleagues of ours who run other AWS services companies, there's so many amazing customers out there that need amazing help, and there's amazing engineers at other partners. But what's kind of your take on how to succeed if you're going to synthesize what everything that we've talked about, and your perspective and your strategy and your view for obtaining this goal of getting, obliterating our obscurity problem at the end of, December 31st, 2025? Um, what are some tips or tricks or guiding points that you have for us and for anyone in this space?
Yeah. Great closing question. I think, one, first one that I think is doable for anybody is that when I first interviewed with Sean and Kyle, they actually had more of a brand voice developed than I think they even realized.
Hmm.
Like they just needed somebody to kind of sit down with them and ask them questions about it, but they kind of already had a really good idea of who BuildSTR was. And I think the discrepancy was, or the gap was, it was just a little nerve-wracking to start. And I think the fear of starting and of waiting until something feels really refined and perfect holds a lot of people back from adding any value or conversation to the space at all. And the one way to ensure that you never beat obscurity is to never try. And so I think step one would just be just start, even if you don't feel like you have a perfectly developed marketing strategy or brand voice or everything in between. Just start. You probably know more than you think you do. And I think step two would be listen to your team, talk with the people you really trust, whether it be in your company or outside, mentors, advisors, and get some objective perspective on you know what how you can more holistically round your story. I think the third thing would be to keep in mind that storytelling, while very important, and it's how you authentically share about your business, it only takes you so far if you're not backing that up with data. So I think a data-driven story is really important. Make sure that as you're putting your story out there, you're going back to LinkedIn Analytics, which has a fabulous suite of free tools. Look through your LinkedIn Analytics, see how many likes something is getting, see how much time, if you've got a website, Google Analytics, great free analytics suite for your website. See if
Hmm.
you're publishing a blog, how many seconds are people spending reading that blog? Because if you're putting out this great content that resonates to you, but someone's only spending a 4-second window reading a multi-paragraph blog, it's not resonating with your
Right.
customer. And then what is all that time for if it's not resonating with your audience? So that's what I would do. Just start, understand your story, and make sure your audience understands your story. And you can use analytics to do that. I think that's a really practical way.
I love it. I think that's great. Johnny D, any last things?
So key takeaway is reach out to Savannah. She's awesome.
You're very kind. No,
Well,
this has been a great experience. Thank you guys so much for having me on. This has been cool to, I'm usually, in the back rooms, editing this after it's all said and done. So it's cool
and now you
to,
have the curse of having to go and watch the whole thing, which
oof,
I've told you I will go and watch all of my podcasts. I promise.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna need some metric for keeping accountability for that. I gotta make
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. I'll get that metric to you. I'll definitely. Yeah. Put it on my
Right.
OKRs. Yeah, thank you. This has been great. We'll definitely have you back on. And everybody, once again, thank you very much. We've really enjoyed hanging out with you and look forward to next John and Ed's Tech Talk Together Tuesday.
Yeah. Thanks, Savannah.
Ditto. Thank you guys.